So as Andy said, my name's Luke. I am, it's quite a wordy title, the Head of Global Sales Transformation Operations at British Airways. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, apologies, I just forgot to start my timer, so make sure I keep an eye on this, is spend the next 30, 40 minutes just running through some stuff that I've been going through as a business, we've been going through as a business. There's a collection of content here. Some of it is stuff we use in the creation of our business case. Some of it is some stuff I did last night. Some of it is some other stuff we've created. So apologies if the format isn't entirely clean and consistent, but hopefully I've picked out the bits that I think will be useful to you. It would help me a lot if you have any questions. Please just ask as we go along. It gives me an opportunity to stop and get a mouthful of water. But obviously, I'm pretty sure that there's some time at the back end to get into a broader conversation and debate, if that's okay with you guys. So I think, first off, despite the title, does anybody know who this is? We're all professionals. We all probably develop our own. It is Tony Robbins. Does anybody have Netflix? I'm sure lots of people have Netflix. Anybody seen Tony Robbins' movie on Netflix? Do you know what it's called? It's called I Am Not Your Guru. And it's great, actually, if you want to watch it. And despite Tony Robbins clearly being a guru, he's done this movie called I Am Not Your Guru. And I thought this was an apt slide to put up first. I am not a management consultant. I have no professional training or background in sales transformation. I don't have a degree, and I don't have a lot of specific business change experience coming into this program. Just by way of background, I left university thinking I was going to make it playing rugby. This was 20 years ago when there was far too much money and contracts being handed around to people like me that really never actually deserved one. And I remember a cold, wet Saturday afternoon where I propped against a guy who was playing for Leicester, a guy called Derek Jelly, who did go on to make it, played it for a professional team in France. And he introduced me to parts of my anatomy I'd not seen before that day. And it was at that moment when I realised I probably was not going to make it. And I walked away with my head held high. And essentially I've been in sales pretty much every day since then. Design technology degree, but my focus absolutely was rugby in my late teens and early 20s. So I kind of fell into recruitment, as a lot of people do. You know, can talk a bit, like to earn some money. Kind of sort of fairly low-grade university. Recruitment was a good way to come in and kind of establish yourself. Did a couple of years in recruitment, then I went to work for a sales training company, which is where I came into contact with Mr. Robbins. The group was called the SI Group, very small boutique company, and we sold attitudinal, motivational training. Absolutely fabulous. And one of the first things they did was they sent me on a 5-day course with Anthony Robbins in Excel. We ended up doing firewalks and high fives and kind of everything. So if you take the Americanisms out of it, there's a lot of good content in there. We sold some training to a guy called Carl Lever, at the time was CEO of the Whitbread Hotel division. We ran Marriott hotels and had a brand that at the time was called Travel Inn. It's the largest hotel company in the UK back then with 290 hotels. And he recruited me and 3 other people. And I remember our first meeting that we ever had, we sat on the lawn just outside the London Eye over there, and we carved the FTSE 100 up into 4 sets of 25 and said, you call them, you call them, you call them. And then 10 years later, I left the business. I was leading a sales function of about 50 to 60 people with inside sales. We had SME products. It was an absolutely fabulous journey. The Whitbread Hotel division, as was, doubled in size through those 10 years. So I was very lucky to be on that side of the business, we're on the other side of the business. Huge investor in people. I think I was, unfortunately, Ed Fotheringham, who I think is an active member of the APS, who now does the job that I used to do at Whitbread, was going to be here, and I was hoping I was going to call him out. They are a fantastic organisation. I can't say enough about Whitbread as a great place to build your career and learn. The hotel business brought me into contact with British Airways. There was a guy there who asked me to come across and run what was called our corporate sales division. So that was our business-to-business relationships. Anything from the governments to the oil and gas companies to the banks and the consulting firms. About 450 of our largest corporate accounts, all led out of London, but a lot of, obviously, an airline international presence and footprint. I did that for a couple of years, made a few changes, and ended up running our Europe commercial business. So sales, marketing, PR for Europe. Didn't include the UK. They were a separate entity for British Airways. And that really opened my eyes up, I think, to some of the struggles that our salespeople were having. Selling British Airways out of London is one thing when you're 54% of every plane that takes off at Heathrow and the brand is, widely recognised. When you're selling that same brand in Moscow and Kiev and Frankfurt and you're up against Lufthansa, you have to act and look in a very, very different way to how we do here in the UK. And kind of all of that experience jumbled together brought me to a place where we looked across our global sales organisation, not just the bit at the time that I was looking at the Europe piece, and we kind of had this aspiration that we could and should be a whole lot better, and there were a number of other compelling factors that were driving that, and that led me into this slightly convoluted title which said, look, we need to carry out a big programme here, we need to understand what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And that essentially became a big part of my job. We also have some sales operations functions, which is the day-to-day execution of what we do, that kind of sort of sit alongside it. But for the last 2 years, this is pretty much what I've been focused on with a group of very talented and committed individuals. So I think it's always good to just quickly recap what Andy was saying. You probably don't need me to show you this. There's no state secrets here. In fact, some of you are probably less interested in some of the content, but some of our competitors might be interested in how we structure and run our business. And we're also going through a number of HR processes at the moment around the world that could be interested in some of this stuff. So I copied that from their website last night. I'm sure you don't need to tell you about Chatham House rules. That would be fantastic if we could just stick with that. I think a good place to start. Why? Why a global sales transformation? So just a couple of quick numbers to give you some context. 70% of our business, this is British Airways and the brands that we sell. We don't just sell British Airways, we sell our business partners brands as well. I'll touch on that in a minute. 70% of that business comes through what we call our indirect channels. Our direct channels are our call centres and our .com. BA.com. In the UK, it's about 50% on BA.com, but once you blend it across the world, it's about 30% comes through what we call our direct channels. Everything else, indirect channels, is what we in global sales look after. So there's a couple of numbers up there, 2,500 big corporate deals that we negotiate with the likes of Schlumberger, with the likes of the investment banks, with the likes of the British government. On a very traditional account management, yearly or 2-year deal kind of renewal process. Based on volume, there's some pricing. Based on commitment to a relationship, there is different levels of service that you can kind of understand. But that's the core bread and butter business. We also sell what we call B2B2C. So we sell to travel agencies or wholesalers or resellers, if you like, depending on what industry you're in. And we'll come up with an incentive agreement for them to sell certain parts of our business over and above other parts of our business. So, for example, short-haul non-premium business, so an economy flight to somewhere in Europe, we probably sell a lot of that on BA.com. We don't necessarily want to be paying a travel agent to bring that kind of business to us, but premium business to the Caribbean, for example, is an area where we might use a travel agent to extend our reach, to extend our distribution. So we would incentivize them to do that. And we have about 1,000 of those relationships around the world. And on top of that, we have a really, really good self-service product for SMEs. It's called On Business. That's the logo for it. It's broadly self-service, self-managed. It's kind of a loyalty scheme for customers, but there are some big customers in there. There were 70 customers in that number that spent more than £1 million a year with us. So we do dip in and out of that as a product that we sell. We do all of that, nearly £10 billion worth of revenue across 44 countries. That's 44 different sales offices we had around the world. And as I mentioned before, we don't just do it for British Airways. We're part of International Airlines Group. We've merged our sales teams in markets where we had overlap. So BA is the sales team for Iberia in the UK, in North America, in most of Europe. Latin America, they are our sales teams. Spain and Portugal, they are our sales teams. So our people have to be multi-brand sellers. In addition to that, we have a big relationship with American Airlines on the North Atlantic, where essentially we treat ourselves as one carrier. We share the revenue. Doesn't matter if you take a seat on American Airlines or British Airways, it's all the same to us. We share the money out and obviously the cost on a ratio basis. And a whole bunch of other partner airlines that we touch on through One World and various other agreements. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is there's lots of it. It's quite complicated, but because it's 70% of our revenue, getting it right is absolutely critical. The airline industry typically is a low profit margin business, typically sub 10%. At the moment, that's not quite the case because the oil price is sort of historically low. Obviously, it's creeping up at the moment, and that's going to start bringing people back into much more of a focus, I think, on cost control and efficiency and effectiveness, which is certainly something that we feel like we've been trying to fix the house while the sun's shining, if that kind of makes any sense. So there's a couple of other things going on as well when you're sitting there considering the importance of all of that revenue and the importance of all of those businesses. The world that we're in was changing really, really quickly, and that's an easy statement to make, and I'm sure it's the same for every single person in the room, but just a couple of examples that I can call out. Firstly, our competition was just getting a lot better. Whether it was the Middle Eastern carriers who as a premium product, are just continuing to get better and better. Some would say they're state-funded, but let's have that in a different discussion. Some of the big legacy European carriers have had a tough time in the past, really seem to be getting their act together, particularly Lufthansa, less so Air France. Most of the carriers in North America that we used to compete with, so Delta, United, and previously American Airlines, before we had a joint business with them, have all been through Chapter 11. I don't know how many of you know what Chapter 11 is. It's essentially bankruptcy. I talk about state funding. You get protection from bankruptcy if you're an American company and you go into Chapter 11, and you're allowed to restructure your cost base. You're allowed to renegotiate with the unions on your costs for your people. You can renegotiate with your suppliers in a courtroom in a very quick period of time. And all of the American airlines have come out the back of that in much leaner shape, and consequently their profit margins are significantly higher, and their threat to us as an organisation is that much greater because they're just leaner and more agile and more effective. Delta in particular have created a joint business partnership with Virgin, which is very akin to that which we have done with American Airlines. So we were probably a couple of years ahead of them, but now we're competing on a head-to-head basis. And I think probably in the past, I haven't been in for BA for too long, but I think a lot of people probably took EasyJet for granted and probably dismissed them for a certain period of time. That was a mistake. EasyJet is a fantastic business, very profitable. And I think I heard somebody, when we were talking about our Gatwick business the other day, and please don't quote me on this, said they've had our breakfast and now they're coming after our lunch. So these emerging airlines, and I can't call EasyJet an emerging airline anymore, but maybe they were 10 years ago when we should have been worrying about them in this way. We didn't quite take them seriously enough. And I think you can see that in a number of other spaces. Norwegian are now flying low cost. They wouldn't describe it as low cost, but low cost, long haul. Introduction of new fuel efficient aircraft has allowed people to do different things. And something maybe we can all relate to is the piece in the middle is the customers we are selling to themselves were changing the way they buy quite significantly. And certainly if I look at the business to business relationships that we had, the corporates, we were going into sell to the likes of Goldman Sachs. I don't know how many of you here sell to Goldman Sachs or sell to any investment banks. You walk in and there are a bank of professional procurement people who have the very best training that money can buy. They are good. They are really, really good at their jobs. And perhaps we hadn't invested so much in our people to be able to manage those relationships. And guess what? We were taking a few punches, and we weren't often winning those. I was about to say contact situations. That's my rugby coming back in. It's not a contact situation. They're customer relationships. But I guess you get my point. We were sitting down. They had far better data than us. They had far better management information. They understood the competitive landscape perhaps sometimes better than us. So we had this really kind of sort of compelling platform to try and change. This is a very specific airline industry thing. The way we get our products into market is called the GDS, the Global Distribution System. It's owned and managed by, it used to be owned and managed by the airlines actually, and we created a company and we spun it off, which we're now fighting with from a competitive position, so that's quite an interesting dynamic. Amadeus, Sabre, those kind of organisations, they essentially, we put all of our product into their platform and they distribute it around the world for all of the organisations that you guys work for to be able to tap into it and book it, car hire as well, hotels, essentially, everything's in there. But this is changing in like a generational change for us in the airline industry, and it's happening right now, and it has implications to our salespeople and what they do and how they look. The other thing that we kind of observed was a complete change in the sales industry, and I'm sure this is, you don't need me to tell you this, and certainly for the APS events I've been to with Andy before, a lot of these stats, I've seen them, whether it's Gartner or the consulting firms, a lot of people are coming out with this kind of information. The sales industry, the data-driven nature of it, the individuals that are involved is changing. I think there was a stat I saw that said inside sales is growing at 16% year on year in terms of numbers. Traditional field sales is flat. So guess where the investment is, guess where the growth is coming from in the sales industry. I mean, there's a quote here from Jill Rowley, social selling evangelist. I don't know Jill, but I quite like the quote, so I put it on there. The modern consumer is digitally driven, socially connected, mobile empowered. Sales neps need to adapt or be replaced. Now, it's quite a doomsday scenario, but I think once you start looking at some of these stats, and this one particularly is a widely used stat that I've seen in a number of places, that in a business-to-business environment, 57% of all of the buying decisions are made long before your salespeople walk into a room. What are they doing there? How are they going to influence somebody who's already made up their mind, that's done their own homework long before you get there, and is not looking for you as a sales organisation to influence their buying behaviour? And what we observed is there's a whole bunch of companies, a bunch of people there in the bottom right-hand corner. I don't know if any of you work for some of these companies, by the way, but these are the companies I got quite close to when I was doing my research. They'd adopted this and they'd taken on inside sales or digital selling, depending on the name you want to give it, and they were really making it work. And I was looking out at these businesses thinking, we don't do that. And we want to do that. That feels like a really important part of a world-class sales organisation that we didn't have. And there were specific hubs coming up. You can look around the world. Dublin is where we are, but there are others. South coast of the UK, apparently, mainly based on the universities, is driving a load of international students. So the language capability is there for multilingual selling. We went to IBM's inside sales function over in Dublin, northwest of the city. They have 900 salespeople in one room. I mean, it's a phenomenal room. It's like an aircraft hangar, and it's got the most modern technology you could ever imagine. And it is an absolute machine. 54% of all of IBM's European revenue comes out of that one room, and those salespeople never leave that room. I don't mean that in obviously they go home and they come in at the end of the day, but they're not field salespeople. They're not out on the road. They're not spending time on aeroplanes. And what we were drawn to was that volume capability that you can get out of a really well-run inside sales team, the agility to be able to walk in a room on a Monday morning and say, we've lost 2 points of share on this route. Can we not do that today, and can we focus on that? And at the end of the day, have a report and told you, how you got on and what the impact of that activity had been. And the people that were working in these hubs, and the reason we went to Dublin is because, these are a widely used phrase, probably wrongly in this example, but they were millennials essentially. They were digitally native. They wanted to be using CRM as as their CRM machine as the gospel. They wanted to be social selling. They were all about acquisition. They got up to earn commission and get paid using those tools. And I remember when we were setting up our teams doing the interviews, these guys were asking us what kind of CRMs we were using, and they would not join a company if they thought you had a crap CRM, because that was their tool to be able to make money. And that's the other thing, sorry, just on the Dublin thing, is these guys are not just selling in Ireland from Dublin. The IBM example, I think they sell in 14 different languages. These are not Irish people that speak French. These are French people that have moved to Dublin because there's an industry there. And when they're phoning out, or when they're, whatever method of communication they're using, it looks as if they're in France. They can talk about the football, they can talk about the politics before they get on to the selling capability. And there is a huge pool of talent over there that we're just scratching the surface of. I'm sure lots of you have got inside sales functions. If you haven't, we joined a group called it's a bit of a mouthful, the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals, the AAISP. I don't know if you've ever come across them. They have a London chapter, and I went to their annual conference a couple of years ago. And they said at the time in Dublin there were 20,000 people working in the inside sales industry. I went to the same conference a year later and the number was 100,000. And there's just flooding in all of these people. The downside of that is the prices are going up. So to get the right people, A, property is going up, and B, the salaries are going up, but the skills are there. There are other areas, but I'm sure, and around the world, Kuala Lumpur and various other places, but certainly from a UK and Ireland perspective, Dublin was where we wanted to go. If you take all of that, the competitive threats and the changing landscapes and the different kind of ways of selling, and you think about the integration of our businesses over time, I mentioned before we're multi-brand sellers. That's good news for our customers. We can sell more routes to more places with greater schedules. You can earn and burn your frequent flyer points across all of these other airlines, whereas maybe before you could just use it on British Airways. But what it had done is create a whole load of back office infrastructure challenges for us. So selling airlines is intrinsically complicated just in terms of the way that you have to distribute the product. But it's been complicated for a number of years, and BA had found a way. American Airlines had found a way, and Iberia had found a way, but unfortunately those ways weren't the same. And in the back office, we were just forcing this stuff together in our rush to get our product in front of the customer, which was the right thing to do, but we hadn't considered the complexity that we were building over the years. And every time we add another partner to IAG, every time we add another airline to Oneworld, we were just bolting on another bit of complexity, and it was slowing our people down. And really, kind of what that meant was we were creating an infrastructure that was very, very inefficient over the years, not on purpose, of course. These are the right things to do. You make the decision in the time. But what was happening was that inefficient process is taking our people away from the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. We want our salespeople to be selling. There are other roles within our sales function, not just necessarily customer-facing sales. But what we had was a blend of everybody kind of doing a bit of everything, whether it was dealing or data or servicing the customer, new business, account management. Kind of everybody was doing a bit of everything, particularly away from London, particularly away from our home market, where the need to do that was more specific because there's less of you in the market, and you kind of do have to do a bit of everything. And that was starting to manifest itself in issues with our customers. In my Europe job, we were kicked out of a number of RFPs because we were just too slow to respond. Because what we were trying to do was go all the way around the world, talking to all of these airlines, trying to get some pricing agreed to put in front of a customer in Frankfurt. And all of the people around the world had a different view of what success looked like, and consequently we couldn't get a deal together to put to this customer. And they said, well, look, Lufthansa have done it, Star and Sky have done it, and we asked for an extension and we got it, and then we asked for another extension, and they said, no, you're done, you're out. And for me, that was a real watershed moment. I said, we've got to do something about this. This is a really painful process, and I'm sure, again, you've probably heard lots of stats. I don't know what it is in the room, what you think. How much time do you think your people spend on selling activities, revenue generating activities, and how much time do you think your people spend on administration, on sitting on a plane, on sitting, driving around the country in their car? I think broadly, if you look at Gartner and various other places, the stat is around about 27%. I don't know how they get to that number. I'm sure they're not looking at everyone's diaries, but we felt it was probably less than that for us because of this complexity that we had created within our own business. So, just quick sort of summary of why. Competition was changing, we needed to be fast and agile. New ways of working were popping up around the world, and we weren't optimizing those. We needed to get on board, we needed to start learning. Our own commercial infrastructure was very, very complex, and we hadn't invested in it really over the years. And all of that meant that our sales force were spending their time on far too many things, few of which were revenue generating. And we needed to get back to a position where we were agile, focused, and specific individuals, kind of sort of moving forward. So that's the kind of why, if you like, the Simon Sinek why. I said I wouldn't talk for too long. That was 22 minutes I just did in the setup. So flag me if this is going on too long, Andrew. I'll keep my eye on you.